You want to take what's mine, you gotta beat me. But nobody ever beats me.
This is Def Jam Vendetta. As far as underrated classics go, the 2003 arcade wrestling game from Aki Corporation and EA is definitely among the top contenders. It was never meant to be that way, though. In fact, the entire concept of the game was pitched by two people who thought it would be terrible. Flash forward in time, and the Def Jam series has multiple beloved games under its championship belt. But today, the accidentally iconic series is on the ropes. Published under the short-lived EA Sports Big label, Def Jam Vendetta wasn't exactly a passion project for anyone involved. If there was one word to describe the game's development, it would be synergizing. The classic corporate buzzword that basically just means everyone involved is going to make a lot of money. NBA Street developers Josh Holmes and Daryl Anselmo were busy working on a game codenamed Kung Fu Fighting when some EA executives pulled them away. They were tasked with creating a wrestling game pitch that EA could then give to a third-party development team called Aki Corporation. At the time, Aki was best known for their WWF titles, WrestleMania 2000 and No Mercy. It was safe to say they knew what they were doing and just needed to be pointed in the right direction. Holmes and Anselmo knocked out the assignment and basically forgot about the whole thing. That is, until a week later when those same executives called them in for a creative brainstorming meeting with Aki. Both Holmes and Anselmo were under the impression that they were there to help get the developers at Aki started, and that they'd leave the meeting and be able to go back to their own project without ever having to think about wrestling again. Holmes described the meeting in an interview with OK Player as a typical brainstorming session where no idea is out of bounds. So, being fans of the music genre, Holmes and Anselmo offhandedly pitched the idea of the game being grounded in the world of hip-hop. To their surprise, the execs loved the angle, and they took it a step further, imagining real-life rappers and hip-hop artists going up against one another in the ring, and they quickly went to work calling up their buddies over at Def Jam Recordings to make it happen. Luckily, Def Jam's president Kevin Liles was already in the market for some kind of video game crossover. In the words of Lauren Wertzer-Seawood, the former director of operations, "The first thing I remember doing is reading an article about the value of EA and how much money they made, and I realized, okay, we need to do this." And with that, the concept for Def Jam Vendetta was approved without any thought toward logistics or actually making the thing. Both EA and Def Jam Recordings were seeing dollar signs, so that's all that mattered. According to Holmes, he and Anselmo left that meeting feeling terrible for the development team at Aki. Combining hip-hop music and culture with arcade-style wrestling, and using the actual likenesses of famous rappers to do it. To them, it seemed like an impossible idea that they had unintentionally implanted in the heads of their bosses. But hey, at least they didn't have to make the game, right? Oh. Yeah, about 3 days later, Holmes and Anselmo got a call. They were going to be working on Def Jam Vendetta. Holmes would take on the role of lead designer, and they only had 8 months to complete it. After what we can only assume was a period of intense crunch, Def Jam Vendetta released in April of 2003 to a warm critical reception and impressive sales numbers. According to Next Gen Biz, the game sold around 750,000 copies, putting it just above SSX Tricky in terms of revenue. That's a pretty impressive benchmark, and if you want to learn why, you should definitely check out our video on SSX Tricky. While you're at it, consider liking this video and subscribing to Nerdstalgic Gaming if you've enjoyed what you've seen so far. For a game pitched by accident and made purely to line the pockets of a record label and game publishing executives, Def Jam Vendetta did not feel like the cash grab it so obviously started out as. As usual, we have the creative people at the center of its development to thank for that, but in a less conventional twist, the creative people weren't just game developers. They were also hip-hop artists. By the early 2000s, video games had started to lean hard into the use of recognizable music in their soundtracks. Crazy Taxi, Tony Hawk Pro Skater, and SSX Tricky all used their licensed music to great success. And wrestling games? Well, they were a dime a dozen. There had been an explosion in popularity in the 90s that continued through to the early 2000s, with Aki helping to lead the charge. It would have been easy for the devs to shove some licensed songs into the game, reskin one of Aki's other wrestling titles with crudely done avatars of famous rappers, and call it a day. Given the time frame they were expected to work under, that's honestly all anyone could expect from them. That's not what happened though. Instead, Def Jam Vendetta's concept was taken seriously, or at least as seriously as a game featuring DMX and Ludacris as pro wrestlers could be. It was a perfect blend of both substance and style. The actual gameplay provided players with a lot of surprisingly deep mechanics, a huge array of moves, and a ton of playable characters. Even the story mode was surprisingly competent and unabashedly drenched in hip-hop culture. Some features had been left out, like several variations on match types and any kind of created character, but what was there felt polished and fun. Obviously, the biggest draw for Def Jam Vendetta was the artists, and the devs spared no expense when it came to realizing them in-game. Holmes and the Aki team worked closely with the featured rappers, giving them some level of creative control with what their in-game model would look like and what their signature finishing move would be. There were a total of 12 locations, with each artist getting one to match their specific character. And of course, they all lent their voices to the game as well.
Y'all really think this cat can handle the dog?
This level of attention to detail really made the game what it is. Though the devs had to fight against the looming T for teen rating, Def Jam Vendetta managed to feel authentic because they adhered so closely to the word of the artists and the culture they belonged to. Because of that dedication to authenticity, the intimate involvement of the featured artists, and the top-tier quality of the actual gameplay, Def Jam Vendetta became the first mainstream game to successfully blend hip-hop and video games. It synergized the market just as the execs had hoped it would, introducing players to music they may not have heard of, and hip-hop fans to games they might not have played. And it was all done via the extremely popular wrestling game subgenre. The ridiculously fast turnaround and lucrative launch meant that the game was immediately followed by several sequels and spin-offs. But Vendetta would end up being the only Def Jam game to be published under EA Sports Big. As the label started to wind down, so too did all the incredible titles made under the brand. Def Jam Fight for New York released in 2004 and was ported to the PSP in 2006. Both versions received similar critical and financial success to the original Def Jam, but it wouldn't last. 2007's Def Jam Icon ended up being a controversial entry into the series, seeing as it wasn't nearly as focused on wrestling, and it wasn't developed by Aki. In a tale as old as time, the people most equipped to make a sequel were taken off the project so they could try to work their magic on another IP. It didn't work, and neither did 2010's Def Jam Rap Star, which is a karaoke game spinoff of the Def Jam franchise. And from there, Def Jam was dead in the water. It had met its fate as so many other games originally published under the defunct EA Sports Big label. The sports titles that survived this mid-2000s became progressively more formulaic and far less creatively driven, which left very little room for a series like Def Jam. AAA wrestling games in particular have suffered throughout the years from being uninspired, broken, and at least 5 years behind other genres in terms of their graphics and animations. Unlike Def Jam Vendetta, it's very obvious that these games originated as simple cash grabs. There's no substance or style to a lot of these newer titles, and the fact that they are pumped out so consistently makes it that much more. Rumors of a new installment in the Def Jam series have been floating around the internet for some years, and there may be no better time for it. Gaming needs more creative risks like Def Jam, and game publishers need to be reminded that sometimes those creative risks pay off. The original Def Jam Vendetta was a haphazard pitch made by two hip-hop fans who had no intention of actually making a game. But they did, and it ended up being incredible. Def Jam isn't just a great wrestling game that holds up better than some titles that came out over a decade later. It's also a stellar example of how to meld two communities together in a way that feels both natural and respectful. And that's what makes Def Jam Vendetta an accidental icon. Thanks so much for watching this video all the way to the end. If you liked what you saw, be sure to let us know by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sounding off in the comments, would you play another Def Jam game? Would you want it to be a throwback or include modern artists?